The scream was hers, but no one heard it. Wind tore through the canyon, drowning her voice as she stumbled barefoot over jagged stone, her white dress shredded and streaked with mud. In her hand, the last thing she clung to wasn't food or a weapon, but a gold ring still warm from the fire. A bear had taken her scent. A man had taken her name. And the wilderness? It was taking everything else. She dropped to her knees beside the river, the current whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Blood trickled down her ankle. Her lips trembled, not from cold, but from knowing she had nowhere else to run. Somewhere behind her, they were coming. Men on horseback, with ropes and torches, and laws that weren't written to protect girls. Like her, she had escaped the marriage, but not the curse that came with it. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. The town was built on dust and kept alive by silence. Every morning, a fog of grit rolled in with the wind, curling through cracked shutters and whispering down empty alleys like an old ghost looking for something it lost. The wooden planks of the saloon groaned with every footstep. The bell over the general store door was always just a little too loud, and the church pews sat mostly empty, except on Sundays, when they filled just enough to prove God hadn't completely left them behind. But for her, the town had always been half a cage, half a mirror, and it never reflected anything kind. People didn't speak her name, not in public, not unless it was followed by a whisper. She lived alone in the cabin up by Dry Ridge, just past the old windmill with one broken blade. No one went up there unless something needed mending, and only when no one else would do. Her hands were steady, her sewing fine, and her ear was good. Just the one. The left one had been gone since she was 11. No one knew exactly how it happened. Some said her mother dropped her. Some said her father did worse. All anyone really knew was that the girl with the limp and the half-hearing didn't belong in a town that prized perfection, or the illusion of it. She wore her hair long and loose over her shoulder to cover the scar. Not because she cared, she didn't, but because it made people look her in the eye instead of the wound. Even if just for a moment. At 16, she buried her father. At 17, her mother vanished into the hills, left nothing but a scarf and a prayer stone behind. And at 18, she married a man who smelled like cedar smoke and gunpowder. He died before the year was out. Some said fever, some said bullets. She never corrected them. She had no friends, just routines. A candle that burned too low. A pie that never fully cooled. Rainwater collected in barrels. A rocking chair that creaked like it was grieving something. And always, always the whispers. I heard she sees ghosts. She talks to herself. She's cursed. That limp, born with it. Not born, dropped. People forget that whispers carry, especially in towns like these, especially to girls like her. The sheriff's wife once handed her a jar of honey and said, "You're strong, honey. Stronger than most." But even that was years ago. Pity turns sour fast in places where men wear badges and women wear bruises like pearls. Then the rumors started about Jeb Wilkins, 42, widowed twice, land as far as the eye could see, and a temper he kept just under his Sunday smile. He took an interest in her. Not the way a man should. Not with gentleness or grace, but like he was picking a mare from a pen. Something quiet. Something that wouldn't run far. The pastor called it providence, said she'd be taken care of, said she'd been alone too long. She didn't scream. Not yet, not then, but something cracked inside her when they delivered the dress. Cream-colored, lace, stiff with starch, shoes she didn't ask for, and a veil so thick it felt like a shroud. The wedding was set for Friday. She didn't sleep, didn't eat, just listened to the wind clawing at the shutters and thought of the river behind her house and how deep the current ran in spring. On Thursday, she found a note nailed to her door. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You're lucky to be wanted at all. J.W." Her hands shook when she read it, but not with fear, with something colder, colder than grief, colder than rage. Resolve. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe. I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. The next morning, she packed nothing. No bags, no food, no letters, only the dress. She folded it carefully, tied it with twine, and buried it under the floorboards. By nightfall, she would be gone. But the wilderness. The wilderness had been waiting longer than anyone. She thought she'd made it clear. She didn't want saving. Not by God, not by Jeb Wilkins, not by anyone. But that was before the stranger rode into town. The day he arrived, the wind changed. It wasn't just that the dust hung heavier, or that the sun burned a little whiter in the sky. It was in the way the horses pinned their ears back, at the hitching posts. In the way the blacksmith stopped hammering mid-swing, his mouth half open like he'd swallowed a nail. He wasn't a big man, not the way the sheriffs liked to be, with bellies thick from drink and fists heavier than their guns. No, he was wiry, mean-looking maybe if you didn't look close. But she did. She saw the way he moved. Careful, like every step cost him something, like he knew the ground could open up and swallow him at any second, and when he turned, she saw the scar. Not a thin one. Not a neat one. A jagged, awful thing that pulled his mouth into a near smile that wasn't happy at all. She was standing outside the general store, sack of flour in her hands, when their eyes met. A second, maybe two. Enough. He nodded once, slow and sure, and then tipped his hat like she was someone worth tipping it to. It was the first kindness she'd been shown in months. Maybe longer. She didn't smile back. Didn't dare. Just turned and walked. Home. Heart banging against her ribs like it wanted out. The townsfolk noticed. They always noticed. By sundown, the whispers had started again. Drifter. Gun hand, bet you. Probably running from the law. Or bringing it. She stayed, inside the rest of the day, mended a torn hem, scrubbed the floor until her knuckles bled. Anything to keep her mind from the way he looked at her, as if she wasn't broken. As if the limp didn't matter. As if the scar wasn't the loudest thing about her. The next morning she found him again. Or maybe he found her. She was at the well behind the church filling her pail when she heard boots crunch the gravel. She didn't turn. "You're the girl," he said. His voice was rough, like river stones scraping together. Not cruel, though. Not like Jeb's. She braced herself, expecting the usual. Something about her limp or her mother, or the rumors about witches and ghosts. Instead, he just stood there, waiting. "I'm no one," she said finally without looking up. He chuckled once, low and short. "Ain't nobody no one." She dared a glance over her shoulder. He was leaning against the fence, arms folded. Dust on his boots, a cut on his knuckle. Like he'd fought something on the way into town and didn't care who noticed. "What do you want?" she asked. The words came out harsher than she meant. He didn't flinch, just shrugged. "Just water." Suspicion prickled her skin. People didn't ask things plain around here. They circled you like buzzards waiting for you to fall. "But this man?" he asked straight. Without thinking, she handed him the pail. Their fingers brushed. She yanked her hand back fast, but it was too late. The heat of his skin stayed. He took a long drink, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and set the pail down gently, like it was something sacred. "Thank you, miss." Miss. Not girl. Not cripple. Not cursed. Miss. She hated how much it made her chest ache. The sheriff's wife watched from across the road, pretending to rearrange a basket of onions. Two boys snickered behind the livery stable. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp and warning. He saw it too. The way the town bristled, the way suspicion curled in the corners of every window. "They don't like me much," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "They don't like anyone they don't own," she said before she could stop herself. He smiled then, not a pretty smile, a real one, crooked and knowing. "Guess that makes two of us." The church. Bell rang once. Noon. She should have left then. Should have run back to her cabin and locked the door and pretended none of it happened. Instead, she stood there a moment longer, looking at him like she was trying to memorize something she'd never be allowed to keep. A storm was coming. She could feel it in the way the wind pulled at her skirts, in the way the crows circled high and wide. It wasn't just Jeb Wilkins she had to fear now. It was the whole town, because nothing frightened them more than a woman who might not be alone. It was the butcher's wife who betrayed her, not because she hated her, not because she cared, but because gossip paid better than guilt. By nightfall, the whole town knew. Knew she spoke to the stranger. Knew he looked at her like a man looks at a woman he might fight a war for. Knew she wasn't grateful enough to marry Jeb Wilkins and play the good little ghost they wanted her to be. So they came for her. No torches, no mobs. They didn't need them. Just the sheriff leaning against her doorframe, spinning his badge between two fingers. "Miss," he said, voice low, almost kind. "You'll come quiet now, or we'll make you." Behind him, Jeb smiled. He held out the wedding dress she'd buried under the floorboards, still tied with twine, still stiff with dust and dread. Found it, dug it up like a grave. She didn't remember throwing the lamp, didn't remember screaming. Only the thud of boots, the crack of her wrist against the floor, the smell of oil and fear. They dragged her into the street. Folks watched from porches and windows, some turning away, most not. Children peeking through skirts. Old men spitting into the dirt. No one helped. No one ever had. Jeb leaned down, close enough she could smell the rot between his teeth. "You'll walk to that altar, girl, or you'll crawl." She jerked away, kicked, spat. It didn't matter. The sheriff's hands were iron. The handcuffs bit so deep she thought her skin would split. They locked her in the old jailhouse. No water, no blanket, just a cot with a missing leg and a window, too high to reach. Night fell cold and heavy, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she didn't know how to fight. Not rage, not grief, hopelessness. She didn't run when they unlocked the cell at dawn, didn't scream when they shoved the dress at her again. She just went numb, a puppet in a broken play. Her boots crunched over the frost-bitten ground as they marched, her toward the church. The wedding veil tangled around her throat like a noose. The town gathered, thick and silent, like vultures fat on a kill. And there, standing apart from them all, was the stranger. He didn't move, didn't call out, just stood with his arms folded, eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. Watching, waiting. And for one stupid burning second, she hated him, hated that he didn't fight, hated that he didn't tear them all down. But then she saw it, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand twitched near his belt, not at a gun, but at the old scar across his stomach. He wasn't a hero, wasn't a savior. He was something worse, someone who knew exactly what it cost to survive. She turned her face away so they wouldn't see the tears. The church doors yawned open. The preacher waited inside, Bible trembling in his hands. Jeb's fingers closed around her arm like a shackle. "This is what's best for you," he said, almost tender. She didn't answer, didn't scream, didn't fight, just went limp, and somewhere deep inside her, something broke. They thought she was broken, but someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you, tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here. The moment they crossed the threshold, the stranger moved. Not fast. Not loud. Just there, like a shadow sliding loose from a wall. He didn't draw his gun. Didn't shout. Just walked up the steps, quiet as death. The sheriff's hand went to his hip, but the stranger was faster. A twist, a shove, a crack of bone. And the sheriff went down, clutching his wrist, swearing a blue streak. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jeb dropped her arm, spun to face the stranger, but froze. Because the man wasn't looking at Jeb. He was looking at her. Like she was the only thing standing between him and the whole damned world. "Your choice," he said. Just 2 words. Not a command, not a plea. A choice. Her knees buckled, not from fear, not from weakness, from the shock of it. The weight of finally being asked. She staggered back a step, then another. And he was there. Not grabbing her. not dragging her, just standing, shoulder to shoulder, so close she could feel the heat of him through the cold. She clutched the wedding veil in one hand, the fabric ripping between her fingers, and she ran. Not alone. Not this time. The wood swallowed them whole. Branches clawed at her hair, thorns tore at her skirts. The cold bit deep, merciless and wild. She stumbled once, twice, fell to her knees. He didn't carry her. He knelt, waited, let her breathe. When she tried to get up too fast, he offered a hand, but didn't force it. She took it anyway. Because God, help her, she wanted to. They crossed the river in the dark, the water freezing fast. Her boot slipped on the stones and she went under, gasping. Strong arms caught her, lifted her, set her back on her feet without a word. When they reached the old hunter's cabin, abandoned and half collapsed, she collapsed too, shaking, shivering. Not from cold, from everything. He lit a fire with careful hands, coaxing warmth from splintered wood and wet matches, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders without meeting her eyes. And then he just sat there, across the fire, silent, steady, real. It was hours before she spoke. Why? The fire crackled. Outside, the wolves howled. He shrugged, like the answer was too simple to explain. Figured you might want someone who didn't think you were a thing to be owned. She stared at him, at the scar that ruined his smile, at the hands that had hurt and healed in equal measure, at the man who didn't ask her to be anything but herself. And for the first time since she was a child, she let herself cry. Not the silent, broken weeping she was used to, but loud, ugly sobs that shook her ribs and made her hiccup like a fool. He didn't move, didn't tell her to hush, just poked at the fire once or twice and let her burn through it. When the tears finally ran dry, he slid a tin cup toward her. Water, plain, cold. She drank. It tasted like life. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed again, and this time she didn't pull away. The cabin wasn't much. 3 walls stood steady. One leaned like an old man with bad knees. The roof leaked when it rained, and a family of squirrels had taken up in the rafters. But to her, it was the first place in years that felt like it didn't want to swallow her whole. She and the stranger, whose name she still didn't know, spent the first few days in silence. He chopped wood. She fixed the door hinge. He strung up a snare. She patched a hole in the floor. They moved around each other like 2 animals not quite sure they wouldn't bite, but not sure they wanted to be alone either. When the storm hit, it knocked a tree down right beside the cabin. Nearly took the whole back wall with it. He ran outside with the axe, shirt half off, shouting at the wind like it owed him money. She stood in the doorway, laughing through the rain, not knowing why. By morning, the sun broke through the clouds like it had changed its mind about everything. They sat on the porch, steaming mugs in their hands, blankets over their shoulders, and when their knees touched beneath the wool, neither one of them moved. "Name's Eli," he said finally, after 3 days of not saying it. She blinked. "Eli?" He nodded. "You?" She hesitated. Then, soft as a prayer, "Mara." They didn't need to say more. They built slowly. The lean wall became straight. The stove worked again. They found 2 horses, half wild, rib thin, from an abandoned ranch nearby. Mara fed them apples and whispered to them like they were children. Eli built a corral from old timber and stubbornness. Each day they fixed something, a cracked board, a window, a fence post. Each night they sat by the fire side by side, not touching, not needing to. And slowly, the shadows inside her started to hush, not disappear. Not yet. But hush. She caught herself humming once, startled by her own sound. Eli just looked up from his work and smiled. No comment, no teasing, just saw her and let her be. But peace never lasts long in places like this. It came in the form of a rider. One cold morning, hoofbeats echoed across the hills. Fast, angry, Eli stood the moment he heard them. Went out before the dust had settled. Mara followed, heartbeat climbing into her throat. The rider dismounted. Big man. duster coat, revolver glinting in the sun. "Eli Kane," he said, voice like gravel. Eli didn't flinch. "Marshall." Mara's blood ran cold. Marshall, not a bounty hunter, not a sheriff, a federal badge. One that didn't care about justice, just names on paper. "You didn't report in," the marshal said. "You disappeared. Again." Eli said nothing. The marshal spat. "Thought we buried your record when you buried your brother. But here you are. Same tricks. New girl." Mara stepped forward. "Watch your mouth." The marshal raised a brow. "So she speaks." Eli moved between them, quiet but firm. "She's got nothing to do with this. Neither did your last partner. He still got shot." The silence after that was a scream. That night Mara sat alone by the fire. Eli was outside, pacing, restless, caged. She stared at the flames, at her hands. Old guilt coiled inside her, heavy, poisonous. "I've been ashamed most of my life," she said aloud, not knowing if he could hear, "for how I look, how I walk, for surviving things I never asked for." She looked at the door, unsure if he was listening. Then, his voice, quiet, from the porch. "I lied to you." She turned. He didn't come in. Just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "I was a lawman once, Pinkerton for a while. Then I got tired of chasing ghosts and lies." "What happened?" she asked. His eyes darkened. "My brother was on the other side of the badge. I didn't know. Not until it was too late." He stepped inside, the fire catching the pain in his face. "They made me choose. I chose wrong. Been paying for it ever since." Mara stared into the flames, then looked up at him. "You didn't choose wrong," she said. "You just didn't get to win." And somehow those words stitched something back together. He crossed the room and sat beside her. Close this time, shoulders touching, and when she leaned into him, he didn't flinch. He just held her, not like she was fragile, like she was real. "You've come this far with her. You felt that, didn't you? Subscribe. I want you to meet someone else tomorrow, someone just as forgotten." Winter came early. The horses grew thick coats. The stream froze. Wood had to be split twice a day just to keep the fire going, but the cold didn't scare her anymore. What scared her was the letter. Left under a rock by the corral. Folded neat. No name, no signature. "He's not yours. You'll never be enough. He'll leave. They always do." Eli found her burning it, didn't ask who it came from, didn't ask why she was crying. He just reached out, fingers brushing hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She shook her head. "You don't know what it's like, to be treated like a mistake before you've even spoken." "Yes, I do." He took her face in his hands. Calloused, warm. "I know exactly what that's like." And in the flicker of firelight they kissed, not out of hunger, not out of desperation, but out of something steadier. Hope. But peace always demands a price. The marshal came back, with papers this time. Legal ones. If Eli didn't turn himself in, they'd charge Mara with harboring a fugitive, charge her, ruin her. "Run," she told him that night. He shook his head. "We just built this." She pressed a hand to his chest. "We are not a place. We're a promise." His eyes closed, forehead against hers, and she whispered it again. "A promise." They came at dawn. The marshal, 2 deputies, a wagon with iron bars. No one in town blinked. Some watched from windows, some from behind half-closed doors. But no one stopped it. Eli stood in the street, back straight, coat dusted with frost. His wrists were bound in front of him. He didn't fight it. Not this time. He only looked at her, once. And that was enough, because the fire in his eyes wasn't surrender. It was trust. She stepped forward, the only one who did. Hair braided, boots laced, scar still visible where it always was, Mara, Not the ghost of a girl they once tried to cage, a woman now. She walked past the wagon, past the marshal, right up to Eli. No words, just her hands rough with work wrapping around his, and then her voice, clearer than it had ever been. "I'm not afraid of you," she told the marshal. He raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't talking to you," she added. She turned to the town, to every face that once looked through her. "I'm not ashamed anymore. You made me carry things that weren't mine. You wanted me small, quiet, erased." She held Eli's hand tighter. "But I'm done letting other people write the ending." They tried to stop her, of course. The marshal said the law was the law, that Eli was a criminal, a deserter, a disgrace. But Mara smiled, a bitter, soft thing. "You never once cared what he ran from, just that he didn't bow." She looked at Eli. "Neither of us bows anymore. They left the same way they'd come. Quiet, cold, side by side. Not with torches behind them this time, but with peace." Spring came in soft, golden pieces. They built again, just beyond the mountains, where no one whispered about scars or pasts, or names best forgotten. Eli raised the beams. Mara planted the garden. She laughed more now. He listened like it was his favorite sound. They didn't have a church, didn't need one. When they said their vows, it was just them under the stars. Her hand in his voice cracking when he said her name like a gift. They didn't wear rings, but they built a porch swing and carved their initials into the wood. And when the snow came again that winter, it didn't feel cruel. It felt like a blessing. One morning she found him staring at the hills. She slipped her arms around him. "What are you thinking?" He paused. "Thinking I used to run to forget." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And now?" "I run towards something." She smiled. They didn't need to say what. The baby came in the fall, born with fists curled tight and lungs full of storm. Mara held her against her chest, weeping with something too big for words. They named her Hope, because what else could she be? She still has bad nights. Eli, too. Some memories don't fade. They soften, but never vanish. But on those nights, they sit by the fire, her hand in his. No need to fill the silence, just presence, just peace. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.